but I'll tell you one thing, you're going to be dead a hell of a lot longer than you're going to be alive. Why in the world would you do something you have no passion for? And I go, well, I don't really know what else I could do. And he got even madder. I mean, he said, you got to be kidding me. All I've ever heard you talk about your entire life is restaurants and food. It still didn't dawn on me at that minute. I said, so what am I supposed to go eat in restaurants the rest of my life? He goes, no, you fool, you should open one.
Well, Danny Meyer, so glad that you came all the way here to spend some time in the Entrepreneur Studio. Welcome.
I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, how's the season going for you?
It's been an amazing season, and I think we're all waiting for the other shoe to drop. You know, in the restaurant business, the 2.5 years of COVID have just been such a slog. And I'm so amazed and impressed with our industry and how intrepid and resilient and just this can-do spirit that you see throughout our industry. And so there's been this constant drumbeat of, well, don't get too comfortable because there's about to be a recession, or don't get too comfortable because there's going to be some other strain of the flu or COVID or whatever. And we're okay. We're dealing with it, but it's almost as if the consumer who's also hearing that is saying, "Well, I better eat out now because I don't know what tomorrow's going to be like." So we've just never been busier. It's absolutely amazing.
Number one, that's awesome to hear, and I think it's a really interesting topic as it relates to during COVID, the resilience that you were just talking about. It was remarkable how the demand for restaurants still remained high, but how you got all of your food got totally different, and it totally changed. What were some of the things that you sort of like? What were some of the pivots that you're like, we need to do this and we need to do it quickly? What were those conversations like?
Well, we were pretty slow. In all fairness, I have a daughter who is in the ice cream business, and she had just opened her ice cream place called Cafe Pana. She had no experience being in the restaurant business. She pivoted so quickly, changed her entire business model, and we're sitting there, going about 1 mile an hour trying to figure out how do we get outdoor dining, which was not actually permitted even for the longest time. So in the very early stages, we tried selling wine out the door because there was a special dispensation that the government said you can finally do that. That sold about $300 a day. That didn't really do much, and it's not like New Yorkers could buy a lot of wine and drive it home, on their bicycle. Because nobody was taking the subway, nobody was wanting to be in taxis at that point.
Yes.
So we were just really, really slow off the mark, and we tried the delivery. We tried to do hospitality house calls by writing to all of our best customers and saying, first meal's on us. You've been so loyal to us. And in the end, I think where we succeeded the most was thinking about the many, many staff members that we had laid off. And we raised a big fund, $2 million, with working with our regular guests. We had a couple auctions. We sold gift cards where 100% of the money would go to this fund we created called the Hugs Fund. And I think we probably did a really good job with that, but we did a really bad job of getting back into the business of being restaurateurs.
Okay. Well, I don't know what was maybe the biggest shock, but the Chick-fil-A's of the world, right? And In-N-Out Burger and some of these other places, it was shocking how, the demand for drive-through kind of shot through the roof, and they seem to be, really well positioned to skyrocket. And I think that every entrepreneur and every sort of business owner had to figure out how to scale something quickly.
I think you're absolutely right about that. I'm still the chairman of the board of Shake Shack.
Yes.
Which, we created back in 2004. And while I was just talking about how slow we were off the mark, I want to be really clear. That was our full service restaurants with the Union Square Hospitality Group. But Shake Shack was pretty quick too, with the curbside pickup and lots and lots of delivery. They had a big head start digitally. And it was during COVID, actually, that Shake Shack really ramped up for the first time having drive-through restaurants, because I was the guy who foolishly said back in, 2004, 2005, we will never have drive-through. Shake Shack is about bringing people together, not getting people in and out really quickly.
Yeah.
And boy, was I wrong. So Shake Shack, all of a sudden in this past year, for the first time, has about
The others,
8 to 10 drive-through restaurants, and that's going to continue to grow.
It's amazing. That pivot has been amazing. And I think that the preparedness and the resilience is the thing that everybody is ready for. And, there's the signals that everybody's thinking and feeling about the market and the macroeconomic climate and stuff like that. Everybody's ready, or at least more prepared than we used to be.
Everybody's ready. And you know what the most amazing thing is that people really learned to value restaurants. When it's like that Joni Mitchell song, "Don't It Always Seem to Go That You Don't Know What You Got Till It's Gone."
Yes.
And when you couldn't go to a restaurant, it also meant that you couldn't be with people.
It's true.
It's not just that you had to shop and you had to cook and you had to do the dishes. It's that you couldn't be in a social environment. And I think that restaurants have proven in their absence that they play an incredibly valuable role in society. It's not just all the jobs that they create, but it's also the addition to people's life and the joy that it gives people to be with people. And that's why I think that at this moment, we're just seeing this frenzy to dine out, because no one wants to lose that again.
Yeah. It's a precious thing. And, I think maybe starting at the beginning is you have all of these themes of people and food, and all of these themes that just, as I've learned about you and have, followed you through the years and stuff like that. How did what was your origin story? How did the food thing start for you?
The food thing, that's a great way to put it. I don't know. I just, there's a great MFK Fisher quote that food and love and security are all entwined, and it's almost impossible to separate one from the other. And I think that food was the comfort that I had growing up. I was the middle child of three, growing up in the most middle city in America, St. Louis, right smack dab in the middle. And when I talk about the middle, it truly was. I had Republican dad and grandparents on one side, a Democratic mom and grandparents on the other side. And every night, the dinner table was a pretty active, we'll call it discussion, about the politics of the day. This is back during the 1970s, so you had Watergate and Vietnam and lots of stuff to quote unquote discuss.
Yes, lots of things to talk.
And the thing, and I, being the guy in the middle, I was the one that wanted there to be peace at the table.
Yes, the peace.
My job was to bring the family together, and food, it turned out, was the common denominator, because everybody in the family liked to eat. And I like to cook. I like to cook with my dad. I like to cook on my own. And so food was my comfort. Food was the bond of love. We also had a housekeeper named Mary Smith, who was the daughter of sharecroppers in Mississippi. And Mary took me under her wing. She was also a good cook. I would go down to her house, and not one of the better neighborhoods in St. Louis. As soon as I could get my driver's license at the age of 16, I used my car to go get food. I got fried chicken and collard greens and sweet potato pie and macaroni and cheese at Mary's house. I would go to Steak and Shake with my pals on a Friday night and get great burgers and fries and milkshakes. Some of the stuff that would end up informing big part of your Shake Shack down the road. We'd go to Ted Drew's for frozen custard. We'd go to Chris's, which was a restaurant on Lindbergh in St. Louis that had a cuckoo clock, and the guy who ran the place remembered that I was the kid who only wanted to sit under the cuckoo clock and eat chicken and dumplings on Monday nights. And it was just this really weird thing where I just had this connection to food. Now, I will say it wasn't just because we had a dog named Ratatouille, which was not the typical thing a kid growing up in St. Louis had.
Yeah.
But my dad was in the travel business. In fact, he and my mom for the first 2 years of their marriage, were based in France because he was counterintelligence in the army.
Oh, was good.
Language prowess. And of course, during the first 2 years of their marriage, stationed right on the border of France and Germany, there were almost no altercations. So what did they do for 2 years? It was an extended honeymoon, and they basically took a car. I think they called it a Simca. It's a brand. I don't even know what it looks like now.
Neither do I.
But they drove through the French countryside and just ate, and they met the innkeepers of these small hotels.
Okay.
And my dad came back to St. Louis after that, after those 2 years, started a travel agency, and he became he was designing driving tours for his, starting with his friends in St. Louis. He was quite an entrepreneur. And then that business grew. He called it Open Road Tours. But he became the first American agent for this group of French inns, which at the time was called Relais de Campagne, and later it became Relais and Chateau. So then we always had French people living in our home.
Oh my goodness.
Who worked for him by day, and then at nighttime they'd be speaking French at the dinner table, especially when they didn't want us to know what they were talking about. And it just was food and wine. It was. I was getting this education. And I'll tell you one other quick story. I was 7 years old when I took my first trip to France. My sister at the time was 9. My little brother was probably about 4. And my mom made us keep a diary, which I hated. I mean, what 7-year-old wants to be keeping a diary?
And to be forced.
But the good news is that I did it. And I'm sitting there at the age of 7 writing about this great quiche Lorraine that I ate, and these fraises des bois with creme fraiche, the wild strawberries. And this stuff was making an impact. We didn't have that. We didn't have food TV. We didn't have those kind of ingredients. And so food as a discovery, food as love, food as an adventure was something that just always appealed to me. Now, it never dawned on me that this should become or could become a career.
Yeah.
Because that's just not...
It was just a passion. It was how you observed life.
It was how I observed life.
Yeah.
But it wasn't even necessarily... I wasn't even aware that was how I observed life. That's just who I was. I didn't have the self-awareness to say, hey, this weird thing is going on.
Yeah.
And you should pay attention to it because I'd leaned somewhere. So.
Yeah. There's the awareness of that wasn't there. You're just like, I'm observing life, and this is what I'm doing. And so it turned into... Like the international flavor seemed to be a theme for you, right? So you're a tour. I heard you're a tour guide in Rome. Well, at some point,
I did that when I was 20, but when I was 12, we took a trip to Italy because my dad was expanding his business to Italy, and foolishly, I can say in retrospect, got into the hotel business. He leased a hotel in Rome, and he leased another hotel in Milan, and we stayed at this hotel in Rome. I was there for my 12th birthday, and boy, was that a revelation. We had a tasting dinner of 8 pastas that night.
Oh.
And I had never seen pasta like that growing up.
Yeah, totally different.
I can still almost smell what some of the restaurants in Rome smelled like. And so this whole thing just kept growing and growing. And it's true, by the time my sister and I and my brother each turned 20, my dad gave us each the opportunity to spend a summer working for him in one of the cities that he did business with in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
So my sister had picked Denmark because that was her favorite thing. She'd been a foreign exchange student there. I picked Rome, and my little brother, when he was 20, would pick Paris after that. So I got this really incredible immersion into Rome and into Italy. I was leading the Rome by Night tours, and here's an interesting side story. That summer was the same summer that Pope Paul died, and so the hotel that I was living in as a tour guide was right next door to the Vatican. Mm-hmm. So I went to Pope Paul's funeral.
Wow.
Which was kind of an interesting thing. Whoever gets to go to a Pope's funeral, it's just thousands of people walking by this open casket in the middle of St. Peter's Square. Promise the story's going somewhere.
It was just bated breath over here.
A very small handful of weeks later, the new Pope, John Paul I, died. And so I went to his funeral. And I went, well, whoever gets to go to 2 papal funerals in one time. Fast forward, the following year, I went back to Rome as a political science student at Trinity College, which has a campus in Rome. And our little campus was in a convent, of all things. So I'm this Jewish kid from St. Louis, and I'm sleeping under a glow-in-the-dark crucifix in this convent. And who comes to bless not only the nuns, but also the students? Pope John Paul II. So now I go, oh, this is really cool. So now I've been to 2 papal funerals. I've been blessed by a pope. Years later, I will get back. We'll get back chronologically. But years later, when I got married to Audrey Heffernan, who's a Catholic, I said, Audrey, what would you think about if I set the record as being the only Jew in the history of the world who's been to every papal funeral in his lifetime and got blessed by a pope? And she said, that's really cool. You got to set that record. So now Pope John Paul II, the one who blessed us, dies. And I go, we're going to Rome. She goes, yep, we're going to Rome.
Wow.
We keep the record going. Wouldn't you know that same afternoon, my father-in-law, Audrey's dad, passes away. And so Audrey's going,
what do we choose?
No, she's going, you got to keep the record going. I said, come on, I got to keep the marriage going.
Yeah, there you go.
So I missed it. I missed that funeral, unfortunately. And then the next pope resigned.
Yeah.
So we have an asterisk there. But I still think there's a shot for me to go to another 2 papal funerals in my lifetime.
Oh, my goodness.
Any excuse to go to Rome.
Yeah, for sure. I've only been once, but it's I would say one of my favorite cities. Just the richness of the culture and all of the architecture and stuff like that. It's just
It's like a living museum.
Yeah,
that happens to have great food.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Is that your favorite culinary city in Italy?
I think it's my favorite culinary city anywhere, and it's not that I want to try everything.
Mm-hmm.
You know, any city I go to, I'm studying where I should eat. I'm studying how many meals I have, and I try to cram in maybe 1 or 2 more than I probably should. Like I'll eat many times a day.
Yeah.
But if someone were to say, okay, that's all great, but you know, if you can only do one, it's going to be Rome.
I don't think I found the right pizza place in Rome because in Catania, Sicily, that's where I've had my best pizza.
Well, Roman-style pizza is very different from the South.
Yeah.
And I happen to love them all, but in Rome, I would send you straight to a place called Da Remo, R-E-M-O. It's out of this world.
Okay. Well, that's where I'll go next time I go. Amazing. So one of the things that you mentioned is your dad being an entrepreneur. So you've got this theme of richness of culture. So people are at the center of what you observed growing up. And then you've got this entrepreneurship thing. And then you've got this idea of hospitality and food. As kind of the pillars of what you just described. What were some of the things that started to click for you that was like, this could be a thing for me, this could be a part of my life?
Well, I never thought it would be part of my life. I just loved doing it.
Yeah.
And so the summer I did work for him as a tour guide. Basically the way the day would go is that he was selling group tours, and he was selling to airline employees and their families. That was the niche. It's a group that gets incredible discounts on travel. As a matter of fact, back in those days, because of my dad's business, until I was 21, I was able to fly anywhere Pan Am flew for $44 round trip.
Wow.
So I went to Rome several times, even in my college years. I was taking a lot of Italian classes back at Trinity, because it was almost like, if you've ever snorkeled, you see there's a whole world, or if you've ever scuba dived, you see there's even a bigger world. Well, learning a new language for me gave me the opportunity to discover a whole different world. But I think what was happening as a tour guide, I would start my day often by going to the airport in Rome, Fiumicino, very, very early, knowing which group I was going to be picking up at the airport. I was the guy that everybody had a red tag on their suitcase, and so I would hold up the sign and collect all these cranky people who had just been flying all night and didn't know each other. You know, maybe there would be a husband and wife, Of course, I was always rooting for there to be more flight attendants and fewer baggage handlers on the trip, because I'd be with these people for the next handful of days, and I would take them on a bus back to the hotel. And I'd get on the microphone on the bus. I was the guy in the front of the bus explaining the trip that was about to happen, telling them about how not to carry their pocketbook on the side, where a bicyclist or a motorcyclist could pick it off from them. And what was happening, and what I found I was really, really adept at and didn't even know it, was I could read people's signs. I could see who needed to feel the most important. I could see who needed to be turned around, who was the most skeptical. I could read almost every single person. And I just had this innate desire and ability to figure out who was the hardest to please person on day one. And by the time we got to day 4 or 5, I was hell-bent on making them the happiest. And it wasn't just because they tipped, and they did tip. I love that.
Yeah.
I loved earning those tips, but I just figured out that I was really good at letting people be seen and feel heard, and giving them what they needed to feel great. I also...
That's the peacemaker in you.
It was. I think that was based on a lot of the stuff I'd grown up doing as a kid in St. Louis. But there was this other part of it, which is that I was using trattorias in Rome as part of the bargain about how I was going to make people happy.
Okay.
So whereas the tour that they had signed up for might have said, today you're going to go to a cameo factory, which is what, that's a gimmick that tours do, as if it's not a cultural thing to go to a cameo factory.
Yeah.
It's just like the tour guide gets a kickback from the cameo company for a cameo they sell. And I didn't want to do that. And I didn't think, I thought I had a better plan, which is I'm going to take them to restaurants. And I started to discover these family-run trattorias that would actually pay me 1,000 lira for every person I brought in. And I was making money, making these people so much happier than if they had, done all the stuff that the tour said to do. I almost got in trouble.
It's a win-win.
It was a win for me, but we were going off script to do it. But I was using food as part of the means to make people feel better.
Yeah.
And it was working. And so, again, I wasn't at all thinking at the age of 20 that this could possibly be a career. I was a poli-sci major in college, and, my whole mind was, and I was interested in politics. I was interested in news.
Presidential campaign, yeah.
Where I ended up, actually at the age of 10, I was working on a congressional campaign as a volunteer kid, and I would do that year after year. I finally had my first professional job, $214 a week, working for John Anderson's independent run. Of course, I picked the guy in the middle.
Yeah. Of course.
Picked the Republican or the Democrat.
Yeah.
I wanted to get the guy in the middle.
There's a pattern here.
But I just have to say that while food was a through line to everything that made me happy, it just was never, ever in my mind that was a valid entrepreneurial career choice. It was something I liked doing.
Yeah.
Any city I went to, I would drive everybody crazy by stopping and reading every menu at every restaurant that we passed. And I was learning a lot, but not towards an end as far as I was concerned.
Yeah. Well, tell us about how Union Square Cafe came about.
Well, Union Square Cafe came about, I've got to go back a little bit because of my poli-sci major and my interest in politics. Soon after graduating from Trinity, I moved to Chicago, which is the New York of the Midwest. Mm-hmm. That was a big step to go from St. Louis to Chicago. And I had family there. My mom's family was all from Chicago. And I was able to get a job at the local PBS affiliate, WTTW, working for the public affairs, the guy that was on TV every day talking about politics.
Mm-hmm.
And I would help him with some of the research he was doing. That was pretty cool. And there came a day, I'll never forget this, where I got 2 new job offers. One was for the NBC affiliate in Chicago to do their public affairs program. And by the way, I didn't even mention this earlier, but when I was at school, I was the news director on the radio station.
Okay.
I was a jazz DJ.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't sure, was I going to go into journalism, broadcasting, or was I going to be a lawyer?
Okay.
Because poli-sci, the thing you're supposed to do is go be a lawyer after that. So on that day that I got the job offer for NBC by the way, to do a 4 a.m. Sunday morning show, which has a viewership of 2, maybe 3, maybe 3 people. But by law, the FTC requires stations to have this public affairs programming. So I got that job offer, and I also got the job offer to be the Cook County field coordinator for John Anderson's independent run at the presidency. And I took that. I took the political job, and I took it not only because I really liked him as a candidate, but I never would have gotten a job with that much responsibility working with the Republicans or the Democrats, because they had an established system already with lots of professionals. So I took that job. It was great experience. It informed, actually, to this day, how I employ people, because I was 22 at this point. 100% of the people reporting to me were volunteers, meaning that if they were late for work, I couldn't dock them their pay, couldn't give anyone a raise. And the only thing I had to motivate people to do all the stuff we needed to do, which was essentially get out the vote and raise more money, is really the only things we had to do. The only way I could motivate them was with the higher purpose, the higher calling of why we were all coming to work, to get this guy elected, and the ideas that he was talking about. And so to this day, I believe one of the secrets to what has worked in our culture at Union Square Hospitality Group and also at Shake Shack is that we treat our employees as if they are volunteering for the job.
Wow.
They get paychecks, mind you.
Yeah.
But my sense is that if you have what it takes to get a job with us, you could probably get another 25 jobs at the same pay rate somewhere else. So as far as I'm concerned, I owe you a big gratitude for volunteering to bring your gifts to our company. And by taking that approach, which then leads to servant leadership, which is that my job when I come to work is to serve the people who I am expecting to serve our customers.
Wow.
And I think I learned that working on that campaign at that time. Now, all that said, I was completely burned out after that election. And anyone who's ever worked in a campaign knows that when you have a finite date of November 5th or whatever, the election date in November, whatever, there's just not enough hours you can put in, because you can never raise quite enough dollars and you can never get quite enough votes. So you just kill yourself trying to make it happen. So when that election was over and done, and I think Anderson got about 6.5% of the vote, which was good enough for me to get my final paycheck with matching funds, I said to myself, all right, let me try something new. And that something new was let me spend a year in New York City. And I'd spent time in New York as a college student driving down from Hartford. I loved it there. I loved the restaurants. I loved going to hear jazz. I loved going to the horse races. I just loved the energy that I felt in New York City. So I said, let me just try that for a year. So I go to New York, and my grandfather in Chicago had invested in a small company called Checkpoint Systems. Checkpoint was selling electronic tags to stop shoplifters.
Okay.
I'm sure you've seen these.
Oh, yeah.
They either put a pin in clothing, or what Checkpoint had come up with right about the time I joined the company was a pressure-sensitive sticker that had a printed radio circuit on the back of it. And so you could deter or catch shoplifters even in things like libraries where you couldn't obviously put one of those white pins through a book.
Yeah.
You could put a sticker in the book, or you could do it in grocery stores. You could do it in drugstores. And so I took a job at Checkpoint Systems as the special projects manager, which means nothing.
Yeah.
But I followed the top salesman in the company who had the New York district. And as luck would have it, within about 5 months of my taking the job, he quits and goes to the competition. And they gave me the post.
Wow.
So I got the whole New York district, and I became the top salesman in the company
No way.
almost overnight. I was I was making in commissions about $125,000 a year, which in the early 1980s with nobody to support but me. And what I would do with my money was to just keep buying Checkpoint stock. I'd had no experience with buying public equities, but the stock, during the time I was there, I felt like I was betting on myself.
Yeah.
Because I could help move the needle on their sales. And the stock went from something like $2.50 a share. This was over the counter OTC, which predated NASDAQ. Went from about $2.50 a share to about $12 a share. And so now I'm really minting for myself. And then after doing this for 3 or 4 years, they offered me the chance to go open an office in London. So now I'm at a crossroads because I'm going, do you really want to be stopping shoplifters for the rest of your life?
Yeah.
And the answer was no. It was a great, great experience. Learning to sell, I think, is such an important skill for anybody.
Absolutely.
And this was the crossroads for me. I was at this point about 25, I was about 25 years old. And I said, okay, you're either going to journalism school or you're going to law school, but you got to plant your flag somewhere. And I was completely confused. I toured some journalism schools. I don't think I ever toured one law school, but somehow I came down on the side of, okay, you should just go be a lawyer. That's what you should do with your poli-sci degree because you really like politics. Back in those days, almost all politicians were lawyers. They weren't actors and business people and all the other kind of stuff we've seen since then. So I did study for my LSAT, took the Kaplan course, hated every minute of it. And the night before taking my LSATs, I was out for dinner at an Italian restaurant in New York City on the Upper East Side called Elio's with my aunt and uncle who lived in New York and my grandmother who was in from Chicago. And they're all having a great time. It was good to be with them and everything, but I was in a really bad mood. I was in a bad mood for a lot of reasons. They're drinking Chianti and eating pasta. I got to wake up at 6 the next morning to go do something I don't even want to do. And my uncle takes a look at me and he says, what the hell is eating you anyway? And I said, I got to take my LSAT tomorrow. And he said, well, of course you do. You want to be a lawyer. And
so what's going on with that?
And I go, I don't really want to be a lawyer.
Oh, man.
And he dropped his spoon and he got really pissed off at me. And he said, do you have any idea how long you're going to be dead? And I go, no. And
what kind of question is that?
And he goes, I don't know either, but I'll tell you one thing. You're going to be dead a hell of a lot longer than you're going to be alive. Why in the world would you do something you have no passion for? And I go, I don't really know what else I could do. And he got even madder. I mean, he said, you got to be kidding me. All I've ever heard you talk about your entire life is restaurants and food. It still didn't dawn on me at that minute. I said, so what am I supposed to go eat in restaurants the rest of my life? He goes, no, you fool, you should open one. It was sitting there underneath my nose the entire time, and it took that moment and that amazing uncle to put it right in my face. So I did take the LSAT the next morning.
Yeah, but think about that right there.
That was the turning point in my entire life.
But like everything we just talked about, you're at an Italian restaurant, right? So you got the international flavor of all of the cultural things that you just talked about. You've got family sitting right there, right? You're in a metropolitan area where a lot of the stuff you just talked about. You're having food and you're at a crossroads. Everything that is a serendipitous moment in my mind. All of those little themes of everything that just came together. So that is a huge moment for you.
It was more than it was the moment, and that moment changed the entire course of my life. I'll just share that I did take the LSAT, never applied to one law school. I don't think I did very well on them. I don't know that I would have gotten into any good law school, but what I did do, that was a Saturday morning that I took the LSAT. That afternoon, I picked up some pamphlet on the street of New York. They had all these little yellow containers with free newspapers that had all these courses you could take, the Learning Annex and all kinds of stuff like that. And I saw one for something called the New York Restaurant School, which was probably a fly-by-night institution. And you could take a class called Restaurant Management 101. And so I called one of my buddies from Trinity, fraternity brother of mine, and he was working in a bank training program at U.S. Trust. And I said, I got this crazy idea. What do you think about opening a restaurant together? You be the money guy, I'll be the food guy, and I think we can make this thing work. And he goes, okay, I'll sign up. So he starts taking this class with me. And my guess is there were about 8 episodes before you were done. After class 2, he makes the mistake of telling his parents that he's taking a restaurant management class. You got to understand that restaurants just were not considered what you do with a liberal arts degree back then.
Yeah.
His dad gets really, really mad. And he said, no son of mine is going into that nasty business. You go back to your bank, and I expect you to go to business school. And so my friend felt really, really bad, but he dropped out of the class. I kept going. And he felt so bad that he said, our bank has one restaurant client, because back then banks ran the other way if you said you were in the restaurant business. Yeah. And he said, I bet I can get you an interview if you want with that restaurant client. You want me to try that? So I go, sure. I'll do that. So I got the interview. The interview was basically the owner sitting in the middle of the bar, and I walk in through the front door, and the owner beckons me to come towards him. As soon as I get to him, sitting in his bar stool, he tells me to stop. He looks me up and down from my Wallabies to my Brooks Brothers shirt, and he goes, "You'll do." That was my job interview.
No way.
I got the job, big deal, $250 a week. So a big raise from when I was working in politics. So I decided I'm going to give up that whole sales thing, making all that money. And I've just got to get this out of my system. I got to figure out, is this something I really want to do?
Yeah.
Was my uncle right? And so on my very first day, they gave me the job of assistant lunch manager, which was BS because I wasn't a manager. I was responsible for checking in all the waiters. I was responsible for working with the chef to understand the specials of the day, typing them up, running down the street to the copy shop, because back then that's how you printed things, stuffing them in the menus. And then the coolest thing of that job was I got to be on the front door and welcome all the guests, decide where people were going to sit. So I was a maitre d'. And I did this actually on day one, I've got to say. And this gets back to how this was a turning point in my life when my uncles told me to get rid of the idea, the notion of being a lawyer. But on my very first day of work, I'm running down the stairs to the basement because they entrusted me with answering the telephones for reservations because they figured I wouldn't screw that up. And running up the steps with a tray full of butter was one of the most beautiful women I think I've ever seen. And so I go home that night and I called my friend. I said, I think I'm going to like this a lot, this job. On day 2, she's gone. Turned out that she'd gotten a role in Guys and Dolls in Indiana. And I go, maybe I won't love this job so much. Anyway, that woman ended up being my wife a year later. And so if you think about that moment, I got a career. The restaurant I worked at is exactly 1 block from where I live. It's a moment's walk from 5 of our restaurants. I got a neighborhood, a wife, a career.
Wow.
And best of all, I didn't go down a path that I just would have hated. And I just think how fortunate I am and how fortunate anyone is when their work is who they are and when their work is what they love.
That's a really powerful thing where it seemed, if I were to translate, you were chasing a spark. There was something going on inside of you that you were maybe not necessarily, you're not necessarily visibly in conflict of, but like you started, you saw a little glimpse of what your uncle was encouraging you to do. And there was a culmination of things that you've been sort of preparing for, maybe weren't aware of, but you decided to chase a spark and things started to unfold for you. And I think that a lot of people and entrepreneurs choose not to chase the spark. You know, they maybe go, I'm going to do what I'm supposed to do versus chasing the spark.
I love that. And I think the spark is where it's at. I just have to share that I have an amazing assistant back in New York City. And like one of the very first meetings we had, I said, I want to teach you this technique I have. There's a lot of stuff that's going to come in. It's going to be emails, phone calls, snail mail, Twitter, Instagram. There's just a constant text messages, a lot of stuff coming in. And the 4 things you have to think about, I call traff. Everything that comes in, you either need to trash, you either need to or refer it to someone else, or act on it yourself, or file it away. And she came back the next day, and this is one of the reasons she got the job. She said, I think there should be an S in there too, because I've watched how you work. I said, what's that? She said, spark. She said, because I've watched how when stuff comes in, you don't just trash, refer, act, and file. Every now and then there's something that comes in and it sparks something in you.
Yeah.
And when we see that spark and feel that spark, that's when magic can happen.
Yes.
So I really appreciate that you said that.
I mean, it's a big thing for me. Like I do think there are these things that, you know, I would say that not all of our intuition is perfect all the time, but there are these moments that you're like, there's a choice in front of me, and I really feel drawn to this other thing. And I really do think chasing the spark is what kind of is life-giving about even entrepreneurship or relationships or, you know, partnerships even. You know, there's all of these different huge sort of pillars in our life, and they will make or break, right? A lot of things. And I think that that's one of the things that I'm truly passionate about, is recognizing those opportunities, recognizing that moment, and helping others do that is something that I'm really passionate about as well. Is just sitting there talking to, like, what your uncle did, man, that's life-giving for me. When I can sit and talk to somebody and be like, no, pay attention to this. This is the spark for you. You know, this is the thing.
And paying attention is truly the thing.
Yes.
There are these moments that happen all the time in life. And, you know, some people just look at them as being coincidences. But if you really pay attention, you know, there's many of these sparks that you just say, okay, that's fine, but that's not me. That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Then every now and then there's the kind of thing you go, you know, I should do that. And then every now and then you go, no, I really want to do that. And I'm trying to spend more of my life as much as I can doing the things, following the sparks that I want to do, and fewer of the sparks that I say, I don't really want to, but I should do. The shoulds seem to get me in trouble. The wants almost never do.
Oh man, that's powerful. I love that. And I think that's choosing a way of life. You know, that's how we make choices. And I think that the duty fulfiller in us feels pressure to accommodate others, or to please, or especially even peacemakers, right? It's like, I feel this tension. And a lot of times to hold that healthy tension as a peacemaker is what makes you brilliant. But then there's the other part of it where it's like, who am I going to satisfy or please? And I think that that's one of the most beautiful parts of people who can be a peacemaker and still drive change, you know, and can still do things that are remarkable with what they've been given. You know, it's not easy to do, but it's that tension, you know, holding that tension and creating change is really powerful.
Hear, hear.
Yeah. Well, so you went from working at a restaurant. How did you start your first one?
So after spending about 8 months at the restaurant called Pesca, and in fact, I got to say, another metaphor is, my parents did not want to hear that I was going to give up the dream of being a lawyer to go into the restaurant business.
Mm-hmm.
And truly, it was like when your parents tell you, don't scratch that mosquito bite. It's not good to do that. Well, you have to scratch it. Yeah, I don't have a choice. And I remember as a kid, I would do everything. I would slap the mosquito bite. I would take my fingernail and make a cross mark on it.
Mm-hmm.
I would do anything except scratch it because they kept telling me not to scratch it.
Yes.
But when no one was looking, I scratched it. And that's what it felt like with this whole restaurant thing. It's like
It persisted.
I had to do it. And the courage that I gathered, for some convoluted reason, it struck me that telling my parents I wanted to be a chef would be okay. Telling them I wanted to be a restaurateur would not be okay.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that? I don't know. It could be because we were starting to read about chefs as household names like Wolfgang Puck and Paul Prudhomme and Alice Waters and, some Jeremiah Tower in San Francisco. And a lot of those chefs that I just mentioned had really good educations. And so I kind of said, well, if it's okay for them, I bet it's okay for me. So I went to my dad, who had lots and lots of relationships in Europe with hotel companies because of his travel business. Yeah. And he helped me to get 2 internships, which are called stages, in France, in Bordeaux, working in 2 restaurant kitchens. Mm-hmm. And I got my own restaurant stages in Italy based on my own relationships. And so I was in Rome, Bologna, Milan, Sardinia, and then finally in Bordeaux after that. And I had convinced myself, this was after working at Pesca.
Yeah.
I convinced myself that this would be the way to really train so that I could open my own restaurant someday. And I did that. I was in Europe cooking for probably no more than 4 months, but it was immersive. I lived with the chef, got to go to the market with him every single morning, slept on his couch out in the living room. And I learned the language of the kitchen. I learned kitchen French and I learned kitchen Italian. They didn't give me a lot to do. I was plucking feathers from birds and opening oysters and chopping shallots and carving lemons. And by the way, carving lemons after you've stabbed yourself opening oysters is not a very nice feeling.
Yeah.
But
lots of stinging.
Lots of stain. But it was, and on the weekends when the restaurant was closed on Sunday, I would go with the maitre d' to various chateaus in Bordeaux. So I was getting a wine education as well. And I came back to New York City and I started pounding the pavement looking for a place to open the restaurant. I thought for a minute maybe I'd open it in Chicago. Mm-hmm. I made the mistake of taking Audrey, who was my girlfriend at that point. I took her to Chicago. She's from the East Coast, and it was probably, and I think this is verifiable, it was probably the coldest weekend in the history of an already cold city.
Oh my goodness.
It's like, it felt like you were getting punched in the face with wind off of Lake Michigan.
Yes.
And Audrey's like, why in the world would I want to move here? And so she said, you can open your restaurant in Chicago, but I'm not going there. And I went, okay.
That doesn't sound very fun.
That didn't sound very fun. So that was actually another turning point, because that's when I started pounding the pavement in a very cold New York winter, having come back from France. And I spent like 3 or 4 months looking for the right spot, and I landed, I found this vegetarian restaurant, the oldest vegetarian restaurant in New York City. It was 49 years old, called Brownie's. And I made a cold call, just like I had learned to do when I was selling shoplifting tags. And I walked in and I said, is the owner here? Why? Why do you want to see the owner? I just want to see him. So the owner comes out, and he's a short, bald guy wearing white socks and sandals and a peace sign hanging around his neck. And I said, I just curious if ever you were interested in selling the restaurant, I'd like to buy it. I still can't believe to this day I did that.
Just out of the blue.
Out of the blue.
That's a cold call.
I had seen a bunch of spaces, but there was something about this that really struck me as being like, maybe this could happen. So wouldn't you know, like 2 weeks later, I get a call. He'd like to speak with me. And so I bought the last 14 years of a 20-year lease. And he had been there for 49 years. So his rent was incredibly low at this point. It was like $8 a square foot.
And wow.
So I bought the last 14 years. I paid him, learned all about the present value of money with the lease. I didn't know any of this stuff. I took one econ class in college. And I set up, and it would be called Union Square Cafe. So this was I started building it Memorial Day of 1985, and I had the place open by October 21, 1985, and that was my first restaurant. And I didn't know what the hell I was doing, but I did know how to make people feel good. And boy, those first days, we could barely get the food out of the kitchen, barely get drinks from the bar. I had inherited the refrigeration system behind the bar because I couldn't afford to buy new refrigerators.
Yeah.
And one of them would not, you couldn't change the temperature, so it was like constantly about 33 degrees, just above freezing, but way too cold for white wine. And I used that for dessert wines. I wanted to have a great selection of dessert wines. What I didn't know is we would end up calling that the medicine cabinet, because every time one of our customers would get really pissed off because of how long the food was taking, we'd go to the medicine cabinet and get them an ice cold glass of dessert wine, and they'd be really happy after that.
It's a pattern with you. Definitely know how to disarm like that.